Last week when we kicked it off, we talked about when we use this phrase declaring war, sort of the series title, it's important to know we're not talking about picking some fight with someone or something out there, but we're talking about taking up the fight in here. Taking up the fight in here and finding some victory for the struggles that we oftentimes all wrestle with in here. Because here's the deal, and this is sort of the big premise for this series, is this idea that if I can win the battle within, I will be more equipped to win the battles out there. If I can win the battle within, I will be more equipped to win the battles out there. And so last week we kicked off sort of talking about the first battle that we all fight, and it's sort of this battle for our heart. This battle for our heart. Because truth is this, is before you lose heart or you lose love for life, you will lose love for God. Before you lose love for your spouse, you will lose a little bit of love for God. Before you lose love for a ministry, you will lose a love for God. And so we talked about the importance of really guarding your heart. What the Bible talks about when we say guarding your heart, and in some cases getting your heart back by being reminded of God's heart, God's love, God's mercy, and God's grace for you. Right? And so today we're kind of continuing on with the concept of fighting and winning the battle within, by looking at the battle up here, the battle with our mind. Because in the wise words of the great theologian Kung Fu Panda, before battle of fists must come battle of mind. Before battle of fists must come battle of mind. It was in the late 1800s. And elephants had first started to show up on the scene and make the rounds with circuses. And so circuses, they started to bring in these elephants for shows and for performance, and they were such a big hit. Like, it just took off so much so there ended up being this huge demand for them. Every circus now, everyone expected to see an elephant. And so the circus promoters, they had to all of a sudden kind of go into action to start kind of breeding and raising up these elephants. Problem was they didn't really know how to go about it. And so when they first would breed some of these elephants, and again, they struggled with knowing how to respond, how to deal with this baby elephant. So oftentimes they would try to kind of just tuck this 200-pound baby elephant into a corner and hope that it would just kind of stay there. The problem was that baby elephants they're kind of born with a natural curiosity and a tendency towards mischief. And so they would regularly break loose. Every town they would go to, they'd regularly kind of break loose from their pen, and they would basically wreak havoc just roaming through the streets of these different towns. In fact, you can actually find some old newspaper articles of elephants, circus elements kind of getting loose in these towns. And so it was becoming a big PR problem for these circuses. So they're like, man, we got to do something to keep these baby elephants from just roaming and destroying every town we go into. So they came up with this thought of, well, what we'll do is we'll tie a chain around its leg and attach that chain to a 6-foot wooden stake that will drive into the ground. And so that's what they did, and it worked. The baby elephant, every time it would try to move, try to escape, it would feel that tug on its leg. And even worse, kind of those metal chains, what they would do is they would actually kind of dig into the skin. It would create these sort of open wounds. And so every time that it would kind of pull against the chain, it would feel this hurt. It would feel this pain. And what was interesting, so they started doing this, and they thought, well, this kind of will solve the problem for now. They figured as the elephants kind of grew and got bigger and bigger, they'd have to come up with a new plan of how to keep these elephants kind of tied and kind of stuck within the confines of the circus premise. But the interesting thing is they never had to. These elephants, they grew from 200 to 300, 500, got all the way up to 5,000 pounds, still feeling stuck by this little chain. Still feeling stuck by this little chain. Because here's the interesting thing about elephants. Elephants have of all the animals in the animal kingdom, they've got the deepest of memory. Like they rarely forget things. And so even as a big elephant, even though it was enormous, it could snap the chain in a heartbeat. The problem is every time it would feel the tug of the chain, it would think back to that pain as a little baby elephant, that wound, that hurt. And it's interesting, I share that story with you because for the elephant, no doubt, it thought that the thing that was keeping it back, keeping it stuck, was the chain. Keeping it stuck was the stake. But in reality, how many of you know what was actually keeping it stuck was a thought? It was a memory. And I wonder in our lives, how many of us stay stuck? In life, here God, speaks to us and says, you're forgiven. My grace is sufficient for everything you've gone through, everything you've done in your life. You're forgiven. You are free if you're a believer in Jesus Christ. And yet, how many of us stay stuck? We never walk truly into the freedom where freedom is spoken over us, but we rarely actually walk and experience the freedom that's found in Christ because of a thought. Because of a thought. Because we look back at a failure. We look back at a disappointment. We look back at our old life. And this thought starts to come. Every time we start to try to step into this new life we have in Christ, this old thought keeps pulling us back. Oh, you can't do that. You'll never be able to. Not to and remember what you did. It's this thought that constantly is kind of pulling us back. And this I share this because I found, again, so oftentimes we think it's the thing that holds us back. It's the failure that holds us back. It's the shame that holds us back. It's the past that holds us back. But I think as we're going to come to discover, it's more often times it tends to be how we choose to think about the thing that holds us back. In fact, Paul speaks about this. Romans 12:2. He says like this, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. You want to change some stuff in your life? You want to change the direction that you're headed in life? If you don't like where you're headed, listen, it starts with your thoughts. It starts with a change, allowing God to do a transforming work, a renewing work when it comes to our thought life. And again, I love how he actually connects it to what's happening in our head and this connection to where we're headed in life. Here, as he continues on in this verses, you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. In other words, what's he doing here? He's challenging us to think about what we're thinking about. To think about what we're thinking about. In so many words, he's basically saying, listen, you need to know that what happens in your mind, it matters. Your thoughts matter. They drive our lives. They steer so much of our lives. It matters. Now, I do want to be clear on this. When I talk about thinking and taking control of our thought life, thinking more positive thoughts, what I'm not saying here is I'm not talking about mind over matter. I'm not talking about mind over matter. I'm saying that what happens in your mind, though, really does matter. And there's a difference. See, this isn't about the power of positive thinking. I'm not saying, if you just believe it, you can achieve it. If you just start, just be more positive, look at the glass half full, everything's going to work out, everything's going to fall in place in your life, it's going to be perfect, or kind of that name it, claim it type aspect where it's like, you see God as sort of this giant slot machine, and I throw in a prayer and I get a Corvette back. That's not what I'm talking about. I don't believe that's the way it works. But here's what I do believe. Is that positive thinking is not a replacement for God, it's in response to God. Positive thinking, faith-filled thinking, is not a replacement for God, it's in response to God. In other words, how can you look at what God has done for you, how he's shown up for you, and not come away with a more positive, faith-filled outlook when it comes to life? When you think of the times he's delivered you, when you think of the times he's pulled you through, when you think of the times he's provided when you thought there was no way out. See, again, this is not, if I just say positive and trying to pretend that nothing bad's ever going to happen in my life. See, this is not about pretending that the bad thing is a good thing and glass is half full all the time. It's I just believe that God is over everything. That even in the worst of times, even when I can't see how it's going to work out, I can trust in the very character of God who says through his word, he says he's working it out. He works out everything for our good for those who love the Lord. It's this trust, it's this perspective in response to the goodness of our God. So again, it brings back when we think about it, really does matter. It really does matter. And it especially matters in terms of the direction of our life, you want to change where you're headed, it starts with, in many ways, dealing with what's going on up here in your head, dealing with some of these thoughts, because the things in our life, it's not so much they define us as much as it is how we think about those things that will ultimately define us. And for many of us, let's be honest, that's kind of a scary thought. I mean, like think about that. And kind of this connection between our thoughts, what happens up in our head and where we're headed, this connection with our direction in life, that's a pretty scary thought. Especially when you think about some of the things that you and I think about. Because I don't know about, anyone ever had some crazy thoughts out there? Like some crazy, oh come on, I know, can't leave me hanging. Anyone ever had some crazy thoughts out there? Yeah, the thoughts you don't want anyone to know. You wouldn't tell anybody, right? We've all got these crazy thoughts that sometimes come to our mind. And listen, I don't know if you're anything like me, but I find that sometimes the weirdest, craziest thoughts come when I'm praying. Anyone experience this? It kind of starts out like I'll get this weird thought right before it just goes totally off the rails. In fact, I had this experience a couple weeks ago in my quiet time, and just seeking God. And when I pray, I always tend to start off with just praise. Just thanking God for who He is. The Bible says to enter His courts with thanksgiving. So oftentimes I'll just start, man, God, you're so good. And I remember on this one particular prayer, I started getting into it. I was just like, God, thank you for your creation. God, I thank you. Thank you for being the creator of the universe. Man, you're so good for that. And I kind of started building on it. I was like, thank you for creating the stars and the moon. And man, thank you, God, for creating Mars, God. Again, it gets weird before it goes totally off the rails. And I'm just like, thank you because I start to run out of words. You ever gotten that where I don't know what to say, and so you just kind of start throwing out words. I'm like, thank you for Mars, thank you for Jupiter, God, thank you for Saturn, God. You're the ruler of Saturn. Saturn, if there's any life on Saturn, you rule them, God. This wrestling match. What am I saying? And then all of a sudden, again, weird before it goes off the rail. All of a sudden, this thought came to my mind. Whatever happened to Saturns? Like Holly and I, we own a Saturn. It's a great car. Like whatever happened? And then Donna, oh wait a second, they went bankrupt. That's right. And they're no longer. Then I thought, did I deposit that check that Holly wanted me to deposit? And it just started to totally go off the rail. Anyone relates? You ever been there? You just get flooded with just these random thoughts. And listen, I'm just being honest with you too. That's the PG version. You wouldn't want to know what some of the thoughts that come to my mind when someone goes like 20 miles an hour on 101. But again, we're flooded with these thoughts. We're flooded with these thoughts. In fact, actually, science tells us that in terms of how many thoughts we get a day. And check this out. It says that on average, we get 60,000 thoughts a day. 60,000 thoughts a day. But get this, how many of these are negative? It says 80% of those tend to be negative. 80% of those 60,000 thoughts a day tend to be negative. Which, by the way, might explain why in a world and in a day and in an age where it seems like we have so much, so many of us feel like we've got so little. Feel like we've got so little joy. Feel like we've got so little peace. Feel like we've got so little confidence. Because listen, I've said this before, but it's so true. Negative thoughts can never lead to a positive life. Negative thoughts can never lead to a positive life. And so we have these thoughts. These thoughts, these weird thoughts, these crazy thoughts, these negative thoughts that flood our lives. Maybe they're thoughts of insecurity, or thoughts of loneliness, or thoughts of doubt, or thoughts of just disappointment. And in many ways, they're sort of, I think the best way to kind of describe how these thoughts kind of get in and what to do with these thoughts is it's kind of like unwelcome cockroaches in the bathroom. And if that sounds oddly specific to you, it's because there was a time where that was actually a real struggle for Holly and I. Not in our house. So Holly's like, whoa, is there something you need to tell me? Do we have a cockroach infestation? But it was in a church that we pastored. We pastored a church years ago in Arizona. And it's funny, they train you for a lot of stuff in Bible college. You know, they train you how to manage the basics of managing church finances, the basics of running a board meeting. One thing they don't teach you, though, is what you do with a cockroach infestation. and so I remember one particular Sunday, because we knew we had cockroaches in there. And there were cockroaches in the guys' bathroom, but it wasn't, it's funny, like, when the cockroaches are in the guys' bathroom, it's not like a major crisis point. But the moment the infestation moved to the ladies' bathroom, like, it became, like, problem, situation, crisis, we need to solve right now. And so I'm there with the guys, I'm like, what do we do? How do we get rid of these cockroaches? And I'm thinking back to some movies where they put the big tent over the building and fumigate the whole thing. I'm like, can we do that? We got to kill these things, right? And one of my buddies there, one of the guys, he goes, look, you can't get rid of them that way. You can't kill these kind of cockroaches. He says, listen, the only way that you can get rid of them, you don't get rid of them by simply killing them. You got to catch them. Because if you can catch them, you can keep them from multiplying. And listen, this is so important for some of us to get, especially if you feel like your thought life is just out of control, and especially in terms of just negative thoughts, discouraging thoughts, thoughts that are just feel like they're just crushing and sucking the life out of you. Listen, you need to understand that when it comes to bad thoughts, negative thoughts, we don't kill bad thoughts, we catch them, and we keep them from multiplying. In other words, just because a thought comes in, you need to know it doesn't mean that it's got to stay. Just because a thought comes in doesn't mean that it's got to stay. As a youth pastor, I preached a somewhat similar message. I was actually talking about the importance of really paying attention to your thought life. And I was preaching to the kids and talking to them about purity, especially purity in relationships, and just being watchful of just what you pay attention to, what you let into your mind, and what you focus on. And so anyway, I get done with this message, and I'm sitting in my office, and one of the kids, he comes to me, and I could tell he was like really wrestling with something, like just like this heaviness on him. I'm like, hey buddy, what's on your mind? Like, I can tell you're really wrestling with something. He just looks at me and he goes, I got a question for you, Pastor. I was like, all right, shoot. Have you ever seen a beautiful woman? And there's like this moment. So I heard that question, and immediately my response was like, see, when I'm married, like I see a beautiful woman every day. No, actually, I wish I was that quick-witted. The reality was, those that know me know that it's months, it's years sometimes before the perfect response comes to my mind. But when he asked that question, he was asking the question in the framework, he's like, man, I just really struggle. I struggle with lust, I struggle with lustful thoughts, and how do I get victory in this area? And so my answer to him was, I was like, look, you need to know that there's a big difference between acknowledging and affirming beauty in relation to God's creation and imagining yourself with this girl on the beaches of Cozumel sipping tropical drinks. Like, there's a big difference there. And the reason I share that with you, in fact, actually, Levi Lusko in his book, he actually puts it this way, and I really like how he says, I can't help it if a bird flies overhead, but I can't keep it from landing on my head and building a nest and laying eggs. In other words, I can't always control every thought that comes into my mind. I can't control every negative thought, every destructive thought, but that doesn't mean I got to let them build up shop. Just set up camp inside my mind. Listen, they'll come in. That doesn't mean they've got to stay. And again, you can't really kill them, but you've got to capture them. You've got to capture them. And listen, this isn't the exterminator preaching. This isn't the preacher preaching. This is actually Paul preaching. 2 Corinthians 10:5, he says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take, say this with me, we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. We take captive. The Greek right there, it's actually a military term, and actually speaks to sort of like a prisoner of war or terrorist that you caught. Anyone grew up watching 24, the show 24? Yes. Yeah, amazing. I know there's some new spy shows out there and new kind of government conspiracy shows out there. But before all those guys, there was Jack Bauer. Jack Bauer was the guy. He was in the terrorist kind of reconnaissance department. He was the guy kind of charged with keeping America safe. And I always loved this show because whenever Jack Bauer would capture a terrorist, he always would ask them two questions. And the first question was this. And he would always ask them this. He'd say, "Where did you come from? Where did you come from?" Because, listen, and especially when it comes to our thought life, I think these questions are so key and so important because, listen, I got to find out the source if I hope to actually cut it off at the source. If I hope to actually get to the root issue, I got to know where these thoughts are originally coming from. And listen, don't get offended, but I was actually originally going to title this message, "What in the hell are you thinking?" What in the hell are you thinking? Because I believe this, is that some of the thoughts that fill your mind, some of the thoughts that consume our thoughts, can I tell you, they come directly from the pit of hell. They come directly from the one who the Bible says is the father of all lies, the accuser of the brethren. They come directly from the pit of hell. And listen, I share it because, again, so often, when it comes to these thoughts, you also got to understand too is that the devil, the Bible says to be aware of his schemes because he's pretty sneaky about it. Oftentimes when he wants to kind of establish a negative thought, and in fact, in that verse when it's talking about kind of breaking down pretense, it's actually speaking of strongholds, and strongholds is specifically in relation to your mind. There's mental strongholds, and these are thoughts that basically we allow to camp out, to set up shop in our mind for way too long, and they create these strongholds in our mind, right? And so he's sneaky about it, though. He's sneaky. He won't just, hey, I'm coming directly from hell to go into your mind. It's a lot more subtle than that. Oftentimes, he'll show up in times when our defenses are at their least or not at their best. So sometimes he'll show up these negative thoughts, these discouraging thoughts when I'm hungry or when I'm tired or when I'm overwhelmed. Like, have you ever been hit by so many thoughts, just so much stuff in your mind where you just felt so overwhelmed? You're like, someone asks you what's going on, what's wrong with your life, what's wrong with you? And you're like, I don't even know. I got so much stuff going on, like I don't even know what's wrong with me. I got all these thoughts. And listen, here's what I found, and here's what I've learned, and I think it's so significant, especially when you're in those moments where there's 60,000 thoughts, majority of which are negative, are weighing upon you. Listen, when you don't even know what's wrong with you, you don't even know where the thought is coming from. Listen, here's what I've learned, is if I can't analyze the thought, I'll analyze the feeling. And if the feeling isn't love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, then I've got to learn to tell that thought and the feeling to go back where it came from. Because the truth is that, listen, when it comes to the thoughts my Father plants in my head and in your head, they're always thoughts that are going to uplift you. They're going to build you up. They're going to make you strong. They're going to encourage you. And they're going to feed your faith. And in fact, that's what the Bible says, the faith comes from hearing and hearing from the Word of God. And so the moment you identify a thought from hell, and some of you need to work up the courage to sit there and send that thought right back to where it came from. In fact, you can put it another way, is some of you need to set up a TSA in your mind. Where when those thoughts, when it starts to weigh on you, the thought of discouragement, that thought that you're a failure, that thought that you're never going to break that addiction, they start coming your way. You need to set up a security checkpoint and run them through some tests. Failure? Oh, you want to onboard? I'm going to have to ask you to step over in the corner here. I got a few questions to ask you. Yeah? That situation. Let me check. Hold on a second. Let me see if you're on the list. Let me look here. Failure. Yeah. I'm sorry, but that's not what this word says. What this word says is I'm more than a conqueror. That His grace is sufficient. It doesn't matter. I'm not tied to my past. What I've done is not what identifies me. Who I am in Christ is who identifies me. So you're going to have to try again. And so we got to walk over when these thoughts come. Like you're going to have to give me another name. You know, is it failure? Is it rejection? Is it shame? Is it disappointment? Let me check. All right. Yeah. No, because my Bible says, listen, he who the Son sets free is free indeed. I'm no longer tied to that past. I'm no longer tied to that shame. I'm no longer tied to that addiction. I'm free. Amen. By His grace. I'm not the 200-pound elephant anymore. I'm the 5,000-pound elephant that I think so many of us, we walk around like we're still the 200-pound elephant. Tied to a thought. And yet for some of us, if we just learn to pull, we would learn to ask the question, and really get down to where the root of these thoughts are coming from, identify. And listen, this is maybe one of the most practical questions you can really ask when you're wrestling with those thoughts and you're wrestling with that negativity and you're wrestling with that discouragement that comes to your mind, is to just stop and ask, where is it coming from? Where is it coming from? Because again, most of those thoughts, they don't take a direct approach. They don't take a direct approach. Oftentimes, it'll come from, well, my boy has my phone over there, but it'll come from things like that, like social media. And, this isn't a whole, spiel on the evils of, social media or technology, but it was interesting. I just read a recent study this past year put out by Stanford. Actually said the more, they did a study on people's kind of social media habits, and he said actually the more time you spend on social media, or actually I should say the less time, like the more they broke from it, actually the happier they got. The less time they spent on social media, it was a proven study that the more their happiness increased, which makes sense. Because what happens on social media? It's a lot of comparison. We carved pumpkins a couple days ago, and I remember I was looking at how great my OU pumpkin was until I saw a picture of someone else's pumpkin, which had the entire schooner on there, and it was amazing, right? Again, you get it when those thoughts come, you need to ask, where's it coming from? So some of you, it's coming from that phone. It's coming from social media. It's coming from the news that you listen to. Some of it's come from people. You remember those people who walk in the room and the moment they walk in, the room just brightens. They're awesome. They're encouraging. They're positive. They're faith-filled. Let's be honest. We also know those people that the moment that they walk out of the room brightens up as well. Because they're always so negative. They're always so critical. They always find that the thing that's off or thing that's wrong with you or this or that. Listen, you want to start to get some victory over your thought life. Start to break some of those chains that have been holding you back. Listen, some of you got to start with asking, where did it come from? Where is it coming from? Where are these thoughts originating at? But here's the second question. Is you got to ask, where did it come from? But Jack Bauer would also always ask this one. He said, hey, where are you going? Where are you going? Because listen, it's one thing to lead your thoughts, and it's another thing for your thought to lead you. It's one thing for you to hold a thought, but it's another thing for a thought to have a hold of you. In fact, when the Bible speaks of temptation, this is exactly what it's speaking of when kind of that power that thoughts can have if we're not intentional about it. It would just allowing negative thoughts to kind of pull and drive our thoughts, because again, that they will take you somewhere. And typically where those negative thoughts are trying to take you, where those thoughts of temptation are trying to pull you to, is not life, but it's death. Check this out, James 1:14-16. It says, a man is tempted to do wrong when he lets himself be led by what his bad thoughts tell him to do. When he does what his bad thoughts tell him to do, he sins. When sin completes its work, it brings death. It brings death. We were, years ago, we had a mission trip to Lapway, Idaho, and I remember there on it was an Indian reservation, and it's interesting, a lot of times they would just sort of let the dogs just sort of roam everywhere. And so there were just these dogs, tons of dogs, orphan dogs with no home. And I remember there was one little puppy that happened to really capture our attention. Like at the moment we saw him, like the PETA commercial comes on in our mind, the Sarah McLachlan music, is going, so we're looking at the eyes of this puppy, and so we couldn't help it, but our heart broke. So we stepped out and tried to rescue this dog. So we rescued it, brought her home. What we didn't realize is that 3 weeks later, we would be the ones needing rescuing from this dog. Because this dog was crazy. This dog was wild. It was seemingly uncontrollable. And I remember one day actually trying to walk it, trying to kind of teach it how to kind of operate on a leash. And so this dog he's just basically pulling me around the little backfield area that we had at the time. And I'm just being dragged through this field. And I remember my neighbor, he kind of yells over the bushes, like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm walking my dog." And he's like, "Yeah, I don't think that's happening. It looks like your dog is walking you." And so thankfully, and kind of, he's a great friend. They had a big dog themselves. And so he comes over, he's like, "That's not how you do it. Like, you need to get control of this dog." And so what he does is he kind of takes the dog and just kind of pulls our dog Buddy was his name, but he was named Buddy. But I pulls him close. And one of the things he says, he goes, "You got to tell him to heel. You got to tell him to heel," which I love that term, because when you think about it, and especially in relation to our thought life, I think back to in Genesis 3:16, when the Bible is giving this prophecy of how Jesus is going to save the world. And he says the heel of his foot is going to crush Satan under his feet, right? And I love that, because one of the things, if you want to get control of your thought life, one, you need to realize and you need to know that because of the authority you have in Christ, that's an option for you. Like, you have authority because of his strength, because of who he is. You have authority. Like, you don't have to just take every single negative thought that comes into your mind and own that. You've got authority on that. And so for some of us, if we're going to get control of our thought life, that it starts right there. You've got to realize that you've got authority, that you've got a choice in the matter. And in fact, Paul actually describes that too. Later on it says, when speaking of this choice that we have, 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, "The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience. And God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure." You're not a victim to the thoughts. You're not a victim to the discouragement, to the doubt. At least not if you don't want to be. You have authority in Christ Jesus. You have more authority when it comes to your thought life than I think so often so many of us realize. But he didn't just stop there. He's like, you got to tell him to heal. But he goes, you also got to get him behind you. Because as long as you're allowing your dog, as long as you're allowing your thoughts to get in front of you, what happens is in the case of that dog, he starts to think he's in control. He starts to think that he's the one running the show. And it's like, no, if you want to get over it, like you got to pull him behind you. You need to lead the way. You can't let him lead you. You got to lead him. Which again reminds me of another story in the Bible. It reminds me of, remember when Jesus was getting ready to go to the cross. And Peter shows up and he's hearing this. He's hearing about Jesus plans to go to the cross. He's like, "Jesus, I'm never going to leave you. I'm never going to forsake you. I'm there for you. I can't imagine life without you. Come on, you need to stick with us. You need to be here. Like, forget this whole cross stuff. I will be here. I will stand in the gap for you." Now, what does Jesus say to Peter? He says, "Get behind me, Satan. Get behind me." It was almost as if Jesus had TSA on his mind before TSA ever existed. It was like he knew that here was this thought trying to get out in front of him. And maybe you don't need to go to the cross. And maybe you should stick around, hang out with the disciples a lot longer. Maybe you should, just forget this whole, saving all of humanity business. And what does Jesus do? He's like, no, that's not how it works. You know, he told him to heal. He said, "You got to get behind me." He instead of allowing the thought to just lead him, he recognized the authority that he had as a son of God and stepped up, and he chose to instead lead that thought. And listen, this is so important for some of you. Because again, remember, your thoughts take you a direction. And negative thoughts will always take you to a negative path. Some of those destructive thoughts, some of those lies of the enemy, they're going to lead to a road of death. Whereas on the flip side of that, again, going back to Romans 12:2, when you don't conform to the pattern of the world, you learn to focus on God's thoughts, what God says about you, what His Word says about you. What you find is leading you down a path of life. And for some of us to get control of those negative thoughts, we got to learn to quit allowing them to lead us all over the place, lead us into anxiety, lead us into stress, lead us into disappointment. And you got to learn to see yourself as God sees you. You're not the 200-pound elephant. You're the 5,000-pound elephant, who the Bible says is more than a conqueror, who's been given authority through Christ to not be a victim simply to your thoughts. And so when that thought wants to try to lead you, maybe your marriage, try to lead you down that path of noting everything that's wrong with them, all the issues, trying to take you down a place, oh, it's never going to get better, it's never going to get healed. When temptation comes and those thoughts try to pull you to click on something on the website you know you shouldn't click on. Listen, you need to know in those moments, you need to, with all the authority that you know you should have, and you know that you do have according to the Word of God, as a child, as a son, as a daughter of God, you need in those moments to say, no. No, I'm not allowing those thoughts to lead me down that road. But I'm choosing to walk in the authority that I have in Christ. I'm not a victim to my thoughts, but I'm a victor. And I'm going to choose to lead those thoughts. I'm going to choose to lead my thoughts toward the direction God's called me to go, to the plans that God has for me. I'm going to choose to focus on what He has in front of me. And so instead of focusing on all that's wrong with my marriage, all that's wrong with my relationship, I'm going to focus on all that's right. And I'm going to choose to lead my thoughts. And lead my thoughts to a marriage that grows, a marriage that prospers, a marriage that flourishes, to a life of abundance, a life of joy, a life of freedom. I'm not just going to allow the thought to lead. I'm going to choose to walk in the authority that I have as a child of God to take control of those thoughts, to lead my thoughts. Because again, we're going to kind of wrap up with this, and this way you're like, oh, that's good, okay, don't let the thought lead. I need to take the lead with that. I need to find out where it's coming from. I get that. And it's easy to say, okay, I'm going to do this, but then all of a sudden you wake up tomorrow and you're faced with all these thoughts again. 60,000 thoughts coming from all different directions, majority of which negative. It's like, practically, what does that look like? Practically, how do I get in front of that? Practically, how do I get victory in that? Well, we'll kind of wrap up with this. And it's a great verse that Paul speaks on in terms of really what you got to do in terms of really finding victory. It's Philippians 4:8. It simply says this, says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And the Greek actually means to make a habit of thought, because again, you can't just stop thinking. I mean, you can, it's called being dead, but you can't just stop thinking. The thoughts are going to keep coming in. So what do we got to do? What is Paul talking about that we got to do? Well, we got to learn to shift our thinking. When those negative thoughts come in, we got to learn to shift into something noble, shift into something praiseworthy, shift into something beautiful. And then when it's shifted, when that thought comes, when that thought that is lovely, when that thought which is noble, and that thought which is true, listen, you got to hold on to that. Because I think one of the big challenges sometimes is, especially when we're faced with all these thoughts, is sometimes we think we can kind of multi-think or multitask, which is a total illusion. There is no such thing as multitasking. I don't know if you realize that or not. You're really, at the end of the day, all of us, how we're created, we can only really think on and work on one thing at a time. Even a computer, it looks like it's doing a whole lot really fast, but it's not. It's actually just taking a turn at a fraction of a second. It's solving each problem one at a time. It's not doing all these problems all at the same time. Here's the point, is that if you're thinking about a positive thought, listen, you cannot be thinking about a negative thought. And if you're thinking about a negative thought, you cannot be thinking about a positive thought. And so the point here is that, listen, you want to start to get victory over some of your thought life, some of those thoughts. Listen, when in that flood of all those negative thoughts, all the negative thoughts maybe about your spouse, all the negative thoughts about your job, all the negative thoughts about life, but listen, when that one positive thought comes up, when the fact that you've got a job pops up, when the fact that you've got a spouse pops up, listen, what you got to do, you got to hold on to that thought. You got to hold on. When Satan tries to kind of get in there and tries to kind of turn the wheel and get you to focus on something else, focus on the negative and focus on what's going wrong and how miserable it is, you got to hold on to that thought. You got to hold on to His grace. You got to hold on to His goodness. You got to hold on to His mercy. You got to hold on to what God says about you, not what others say about you or what you feel the situation says about you. You got to hold on to that thought. And listen, I'm telling you, when you learn to do that, you're going to start to find some victory. You're going to start to find some chains that, or at least things that you thought were actually the thing holding you back, actually was never the thing to begin with. It was all a simple thought. You got to focus. Focus on the goodness of God, on the character of God, on the promises of God. I want to pray for you tonight. And